When my stepmother slammed that rent notice on my dresser, I thought she was bluffing. Turns out she wasn't. But when I showed her what I found, she went pale as a ghost. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I live in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Illinois, in a 2-story house that used to feel like home. It was my mom's before she passed away. After her death, my dad remarried a woman named Ellen. She was polite at first, always smiling and pretending to care. But over time, her true self showed, controlling, cold, and obsessed with money. I'm Mara, 23, and I've been working 2 jobs since college. My dad, Tom, is kind but avoids conflict at all costs. When he got sick last winter, things changed fast. Ellen started taking over, managing the bills, the mail, and even what food we could buy. I didn't argue. I just tried to help. Then one morning, I found a paper on my dresser, a rent notice. Ellen had written it herself. She demanded I pay $800 every month to cover my share. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. But when I went downstairs, she was waiting with a serious face, arms crossed. "Rent's due next Friday," she said. "You've been living here for free long enough." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard right. I already paid for groceries, handled the electric bill, and bought my dad's medication when she forgot. I told her that. She just smirked. "That's called being family, Mara. Rent is different." My dad sat in his recliner, pale and quiet. He didn't say a word. I looked at him, hoping he'd step in. He didn't. His silence hurt more than Ellen's words. I went back to my room and shut the door, shaking. It wasn't just the money, it was the disrespect. She was trying to push me out, and my dad was letting it happen. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I started thinking, if she wanted rent, I'd give her more than she asked for. I'd give her the truth. The next few days, I noticed little things that made my stomach twist. Ellen hiding mail. Ellen whispering on the phone. Ellen suddenly acting like she owned everything in the house. It felt wrong. That's when I decided to clean out the garage, something my dad hadn't done since before Ellen moved in. Under a pile of boxes, I found an old metal tin labeled with my mother's name. Inside were papers, birth certificates, receipts, and one document that stopped my breath. It was the property deed. The house wasn't Ellen's. It wasn't even fully my dad's. My mother had left half of it to me. I sat on the cold floor, staring at the paper, my hands trembling. All this time, Ellen had been treating me like a guest, but legally, I owned part of the house. She had no right to demand rent. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Ellen wanted money. What she was about to get was something far more valuable, the truth that would destroy her lies. It started small, quiet changes that didn't seem like much at first. The locks on the front and back doors were suddenly different. Ellen claimed it was for safety, but she never gave me a new key. When I asked, she smiled like it was an innocent mistake. Then the mail started disappearing. Bills I used to handle stopped coming to my room. When I checked the kitchen counter, they weren't there either. One afternoon, I caught her sliding a letter into her purse. She said she was just organizing things, but I saw my name on the envelope. The neighbors used to wave at me when I left for work. Now they gave me awkward smiles, eyes darting away. I overheard Mrs. Carson from next door one morning while she was talking to Ellen by the fence. It must be hard, taking care of a grown stepdaughter who doesn't help much. Ellen didn't correct her. She just sighed dramatically and said, "I'm doing what I can." My stomach turned. Dad's health kept getting worse. Some days, he could barely get out of bed. I took on extra hours at work to cover groceries, but Ellen kept acting like I was a problem instead of a help. She'd sigh loudly when I came home late, muttering about how some people don't understand responsibility. One evening, I made dinner and brought a tray to my dad's room. Ellen appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Mara," she said sharply, "your father and I talked. You need to start contributing like an adult. Rent isn't optional." Her tone made it sound like I was a stranger freeloading in her house. I wanted to shout that it wasn't her house, that she had no right, but I didn't. Dad was lying behind her, weak and quiet. I couldn't fight her in front of him. He didn't need the stress. After that night, the atmosphere changed completely. Ellen moved through the house like a warden. She controlled what food was bought, what lights stayed on, even when laundry could be done. I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Every conversation became a trap. If I tried to be polite, she accused me of being fake. If I stayed silent, she said I was sulking. One morning, she followed me into the kitchen and said, "You know, Mara, it's really ungrateful to live under someone's roof and act like the world owes you." I froze with a mug in my hand. "Someone's roof?" I asked. She smiled, tight, cold. "You know what I mean." That was her game. Quiet control, small jabs that built up until I doubted myself. I'd catch myself wondering if maybe I really was being difficult. Then I'd find her whispering again, on the phone, in the yard, even in the grocery store parking lot. She was spreading her version of the story, making sure everyone saw me as the problem. Inside, I was boiling, but I stayed calm. I cleaned. I worked. I kept notes, copies, and quiet plans. Ellen thought she was winning, tightening her grip on everything. She didn't realize I was watching every move she made, waiting for the moment her lies would catch up to her. Dust floated in the air as I dragged a cracked box across the garage floor. I'd been told to clear out junk, but this space hadn't been touched in years. The smell of oil and old wood made me lightheaded. Half the shelves were stacked with things Ellen had pushed aside. Photo frames, books, little pieces of my mother's life that had vanished from the house after she moved in. Behind a pile of paint cans, something caught my eye, a small metal box with a faded label. My mother's name was written across it in her handwriting. My chest tightened. I brushed away the dust, ran my fingers over the letters, and felt a strange mix of sadness and fear. The box was locked, but the old key hanging by Dad's tools slid in perfectly. Inside, the papers were yellowed and folded neatly, the corners soft from. I expected old photos or letters. Instead, I saw legal documents, deeds, signatures, official seals. My mother's name appeared again and again. One heading read, Property Ownership Transfer. My eyes darted to the next line, and I froze. The house wasn't in my father's name. It was in hers. I sat on the floor, the concrete cold beneath me, and flipped through the stack. The first page listed both my parents as owners. A later one, partially torn, showed a signature beside mine, my name printed clearly next to the words co-owner. My breath hitched. I read it again to make sure. I wasn't imagining it. For a long moment, I just stared at the paper. Every word, every signature hit like a hammer. I'd spent weeks feeling like an unwanted guest, someone taking up space in a house that didn't belong to me. Now the truth was sitting in my lap. Half this home was mine, legally mine. The silence in the garage felt heavy. The rain had started outside, tapping against the small window. I thought about Ellen counting bills at the kitchen table, about her smug smile when she demanded rent. She had acted like a landlord, but she wasn't even on the papers. She had no claim, no authority, nothing. I flipped through the rest of the documents, making sure there was no mistake. My mother had signed them years before she passed. There was even a letter attached to one page in her handwriting, short, simple. For Mara, to keep what's hers. My throat tightened. I hadn't known she'd thought that far ahead. All the confusion and doubt I'd been carrying shifted into something sharp and clear. The lies, the control, the rent, it was all built on nothing. Ellen had played her game on the wrong person. I tucked the documents back into the box carefully and locked it again. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear anymore. For the first time in months, I felt steady. I wasn't powerless. She had tried to turn my home into her territory, but now I knew the truth. She wanted rent. She wanted control. What she really gave me was proof that she had no place here at all. Friday morning came with a heaviness that clung to the walls. Ellen stood in the doorway of the kitchen, tapping a folded sheet of paper against her palm. Her voice was flat, almost bored. You have until Friday night, Mara. $800. If you don't have it, pack your things. I was making coffee, pretending her words didn't sting, but my hand trembled slightly as I set the mug down. The smell of burnt toast filled the air, and for a second I focused on that instead of her face. She enjoyed seeing me off balance. Every word was meant to provoke. Dad sat at the table, shoulders slumped, his breathing shallow. He didn't look up. He just stirred his tea slowly, like if he stayed quiet enough, the moment would pass. I looked at him, hoping he'd say something, anything, but all he managed was a weak sigh. The silence between us felt louder than her threat. Ellen leaned closer, her perfume sharp. You've had plenty of time to act like an adult. Now, I expect you to prove it. Her tone carried that smug calm she used when she thought she'd already won. I didn't argue. I simply nodded once and walked away. Inside, though, something hardened. Rage was there, quiet and cold, sitting right behind my rib. In my room, I pulled out the box I'd hidden under my bed. The papers inside looked almost innocent, but they felt like a weapon now. I slipped them into a folder and left for the copy shop down the street. The afternoon sun was hot against my skin, the kind that usually made me feel sleepy, but today it just sharpened everything. I kept seeing Ellen's face, that look of satisfaction, the way my dad couldn't even meet my eyes. At the shop, the old copier hummed and clattered as I fed in each page, one after another. The property deed, the signatures, my mother's note. I made 2 sets, sealed them in separate envelopes, and tucked them into my bag. The noise of the machine drowned out my heartbeat, steady and sure. When I came home, Ellen was in the living room talking on the phone. Her laugh floated through the air, sweet, false, the kind she used when pretending to be kind. I walked past her without a word. She didn't even look up. Upstairs, I hid one envelope under the loose floorboard near my closet. The other I slipped into my purse. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the worn carpet, breathing slowly. Every move had to count. I couldn't lose control, not yet. Ellen thought she had cornered me with her deadline, that I'd panic or leave. She didn't know what I had, and I planned to keep it that way until the right moment. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed, maybe from the draft, or maybe her temper. Either way, I didn't flinch. Let her set her deadline. The clock was ticking for her, not me. The law office was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. A ticking clock echoed off the paneled walls as I sat across from my father's old lawyer, Mr. Granger. His desk was cluttered but tidy in its own way. Piles of papers, framed photos, a small lamp glowing in the corner. I told him I needed help with some student paperwork, keeping my tone light casual. He didn't question it. He just nodded and asked for my name. When I gave it, something flickered in his eyes. "Mara Holton?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Your mother was Valerie, right?" I nodded. He smiled faintly. "I handled a few things for her years ago." My heart thudded. "Actually," I said carefully, "there's something else I wanted to ask about, some property documents I came across while cleaning. I just want to make sure I understand them right." He reached for his glasses, adjusted them, and motioned for me to hand them over. I slid the copies across the desk. He studied the pages for a long moment, flipping through slowly. The only sound was the paper rustling and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and said, "These are authentic. Your mother filed them with me before she passed. She was very clear about her wishes." I leaned forward. "What exactly did she say?" He gave me a careful look. "She wanted you protected. Half of that house was deeded to you. She said, 'Mara will always have a home.'" His voice softened. "Your father knew, but after Valerie's passing, his new wife, Ellen, I believe, told him it might confuse you. That it would be better to wait until you were older." The words hit like a punch. "She told him not to tell me?" He nodded slowly. "She was quite insistent, from what I recall." Your father agreed, reluctantly. "But to be clear, you are listed as co-owner. Legally, no one can charge you rent on your own property." I felt my throat tighten. I pressed my palms against my knees to keep them from shaking, but it didn't help. "So she's known this whole time," I said quietly. "And she's been—" I stopped before finishing. He looked at me with something close to sympathy. "You'd be surprised how often family matters get complicated." Complicated. That word made my jaw clench. This wasn't complicated. It was deliberate. She'd taken advantage of my father's grief, buried my mother's wishes, and built her authority on a lie. I thanked him and gathered the papers, sliding them back into my folder with steady hands that didn't feel steady at all. As I stood, he said, "If you ever need me to confirm anything officially, just call. You have every right to that home." Outside, the air was warm, but I felt cold. The truth had weight, heavier than I expected. Every fake smile, every cutting remark from Ellen now made sense. She hadn't just wanted power. She'd wanted to erase everything my mother left behind. I walked to my car, gripping the folder like it was something alive. My pulse drummed in my ears, not from fear this time, but from something darker, resolve. She thought I didn't know. She thought I'd bend. She had no idea what was coming. The morning air felt heavier than usual, thick with something I couldn't name. The clock in the hallway ticked toward noon, and I knew the day Ellen had circled on her calendar had finally come. The so-called deadline. I was pouring a glass of water when I heard her heels clicking down the hallway. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, eyes sharp. "So," she said, her voice smooth but strained, "do you have what you owe, or should I start packing your things?" Dad was sitting at the table, robe hanging loose, his face pale and tired. He looked from her to me, confusion clouding his eyes. "Ellen, maybe," he started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Tom. She's had a week. I won't be taken advantage of in my own house." Her words stung less than they used to. I just watched her, quiet, steady. The folder in my hands felt warm from being held too long. I took a slow breath and reached for an envelope sitting beside my coffee mug. "I do have something for you," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost too calm. "You should take a look." She snatched it from me with a smirk, clearly expecting cash. "About time," she muttered, tearing it open. Her fingers stopped moving as soon as she saw the first page. The color drained from her face like water running out of a sink. "What is this?" she whispered, eyes darting across the papers. "Read," I said softly. "You'll see your name isn't anywhere on there." The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She flipped through each page faster and faster, like maybe she'd find her name if she looked hard enough. Her hands started to tremble. Dad leaned forward. "What's going on?" She didn't answer him. She just kept staring at the documents, lips moving but no words coming out. I turned toward him, my voice steady. "These are the original property papers. The house was signed jointly between Mom and you. And before she passed, she added me as co-owner." His brow furrowed. "That can't be right." I thought. "She knew," I said quietly. She told you not to say anything, remember? He looked at Ellen then, searching her face for an explanation. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her usual confidence was gone. All that was left was shock, pale and shaking. I never, she started, but her voice cracked halfway through. Dad pushed back his chair slowly. You told me it would confuse her, he said, his voice faint but hardening. You said it wasn't important yet. Ellen tried to speak again, but the words fell apart. She set the papers on the counter like they were burning her fingers. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching as the truth settled over her like a shadow. All week she had strutted through the house like a queen. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes. Dad turned to me, guilt in his face. Mara, I didn't know. I know, I said quietly. My heart was beating steady now, no anger, just a strange calm. But she did. Ellen's breathing grew shallow, her voice barely a whisper. You don't understand. I understand enough, I cut in. You wanted control. You never had it. She looked at me then, eyes wide, as if she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. The ghost of the lie she built this house on. Ellen's silence didn't last long. The moment her shock began to fade, the anger returned. She grabbed the stack of papers and slammed them on the counter. These aren't real, she snapped, her voice shaking but loud. You think I don't see what you're doing? You forged these, didn't you? You probably found some old files and made copies to look official. I stayed where I was, arms crossed, watching her unravel. They're originals, I said quietly. She laughed, short, sharp, desperate. Oh, please. You don't even know what legal documents. You just want to make me the villain. Dad tried to stand, his hands gripping the table for balance. Ellen, he said slowly, why would she make that up? Because she wants to push me out, she shouted. That's what this is about. She's always resented me. Her words bounced off the walls, the air thick with tension. I walked to the counter, picked up the house phone, and dialed a number I'd written down days ago. She watched, suspicious, her face tight. What are you doing? She demanded. You'll see, I said, pressing the speaker button. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Granger Law Office, this is Bill. Hi, Mr. Granger, it's Mara Holton, I said evenly. You remember the property documents we discussed? There was a pause, then his calm voice filled the kitchen. Of course. I confirmed them as authentic. Your mother filed those before she passed. You're listed as co-owner, as we discussed. Ellen's mouth fell open. You, she started, but the lawyer continued before she could twist another lie. And just to be clear, he said, no one can legally demand rent from you on that property. If anyone tries, it's invalid. I thanked him and hung up. The silence that followed felt almost heavy enough to touch. Dad looked between us, his expression changing from confusion to something sharper. You lied, he said finally, his voice low but trembling with fury. You told me she didn't need to know. You said it would be better that way. Ellen's tone softened instantly. Tom, listen, she's manipulating you. Enough, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The sound made her flinch. I'd never seen him like that before. You made me believe she had no claim here. You let me sit back while you turned my daughter into a tenant. She tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away. I was protecting us, she said, voice rising again. I did what I had to do. Protecting who? He demanded. Yourself. Her eyes darted between us, searching for any trace of control, but it was gone. She grabbed her purse and the car keys from the counter. You're both making a mistake, she hissed. You think this is over? It's not. I'll fight this. She stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the windows rattled. For a long time, no one spoke. Dad sank into his chair, his face pale, his hands covering his eyes. When he finally looked up, there was no confusion left, just shame and exhaustion. I let her take everything, he whispered. I sat down across from him. Not everything, I said quietly. Some things she can't touch anymore. Outside, her car engine roared and faded into the distance, leaving the house still for the first time in months. Word spread faster than I expected. Within a few days, people who used to glance away were suddenly stopping at the end of the driveway. Whispers carried across fences and mailboxes. Mrs. Carson, the same neighbor who once pitted Ellen for dealing with a lazy stepdaughter, avoided eye contact when she passed me on her morning walk. The story had turned. Everyone now knew that Ellen had been caught lying. Dad spent most of that week at his desk, surrounded by papers. He called the lawyer himself, arranging documents I didn't need to ask about. The tension that once made him quiet had shifted into a quiet determination. When the final set of forms arrived, he read them twice before signing. The next day, Ellen's name was on a formal notice, one that required her to vacate the house while the ownership dispute was reviewed. She didn't go quietly. Her voice could be heard from the yard as she packed, slamming drawers and muttering threats under her breath. I stood by the window, watching her load her car. She caught sight of me once, and for a second her expression softened, almost pleading, but it vanished just as fast. A moment later, the engine started, and the car disappeared down the road. The house felt hollow afterward. No perfume lingering in the hallway, no footsteps pacing the kitchen late at night. Just silence, thick and strange. I didn't realize how much space her presence had taken up until it was gone. Dad stayed quiet for most of that day. In the evening, he came to my doorway, holding a cup of tea like a peace offering. "You shouldn't have had to deal with any of this," he said finally. His voice sounded rough, tired. I set down the book I hadn't been reading. "It's over now," I said softly. He shook his head. "Not for me. I let her take over everything. After I got sick, I thought I needed her. She made me believe I couldn't handle things alone. I stopped thinking for myself." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't protect you. I'm sorry for that. It wasn't the kind of apology that erased anything, but it was real." I could see how much it cost him to say it. I stood and put a hand on his arm. "You were trying to survive," I said. She knew exactly how to keep control. He looked down, guilt still clouding his eyes. "I should have seen it sooner." I gave a small, tired smile. "So should I." We didn't say much else. There wasn't anything left to argue about. Later, when he went to bed, I walked through the house alone. Every room felt unfamiliar, like the air had shifted. Her touch was gone, but so was the version of us that existed before she came. The walls seemed cleaner, quieter, but not warm. I knew things wouldn't return to how they used to be. Something inside both of us had changed. The house was finally ours again, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The following week, I started clearing out what Ellen had left behind. Most of it was useless clutter, half-used candles, old receipts, cheap perfume bottles. But in the corner of her old room stood a vanity table, glossy and expensive, the kind that didn't belong in a house like ours. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, sharp and artificial. I opened each drawer carefully. Silk scarves, unopened makeup, jewelry boxes lined in velvet. The tags on the receipts tucked inside showed where the money had come from, the joint account my dad used to pay household bills. She'd bought this entire setup using the same funds she'd claimed were running low when she demanded rent from me. For a long time, I just stared at the mirror, my reflection split by the light cracks along its edge. Then I took out my phone and called a local resale shop. The owner came by the next day, gave me a fair price, and hauled the whole thing out before noon. The cash I got was enough to cover a round of my dad's treatment. It felt fitting, her vanity paying for something she'd never cared about. That evening, the house was quiet. The air felt cleaner without her things in it. I made dinner, helped my dad with his medication, and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The peace was strange but comforting. Then, just after dark, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car door slammed outside. I looked through the window and saw her standing by the porch light, hair messy, coat thrown over her nightdress, eyes wild. She banged on the door with her fist. "Mara," she yelled, "open this door right now. You have something that belongs to me." Dad stirred in the other room, but I shook my head and stepped forward. I kept my voice calm. "You need to leave, Ellen. I want my jewelry. You stole from me." I locked the deadbolt with a firm click. "Everything you bought came from the house account," I said through the door. "It was never yours." Her voice rose higher. "You'll regret this. You think you've won? I'll call the police." "Go ahead," I said quietly. "They already know who owns this property." For a second, there was silence. Then came the sound of gravel crunching under her shoes as she paced in the driveway, muttering to herself. I turned off the porch light and waited. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed against the curtains. 2 officers stepped out of their car and spoke to her calmly while she pointed at the house, still shouting. When they knocked on the door, I handed them the deed copies and the court notice confirming her removal. One officer nodded. "You're fine, ma'am. She's not allowed here." They led her to the sidewalk. She jerked her arm free, glared at me one last time, and got into her car. The engine roared, then faded down the street. When the lights disappeared, I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the quiet settle back in. No yelling, no footsteps, no perfume. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and my father's soft breathing from the next room. Revenge didn't need shouting or chaos. It was this, the stillness of a house finally rid of its noise. Peaceful. Final. The seasons turned without notice. Winter gave way to soft spring rain, and the house, once filled with tension, began to breathe again. Dust gathered where Ellen's decorations had been, but the emptiness didn't bother me. It felt like a clean start. Dad and I spent our weekends fixing what had been ignored for too long, repainting the porch, repairing the railing, replacing curtains that had never been opened under her watch. He worked slower now, careful and deliberate, his illness still tugging at his strength, but he seemed lighter somehow. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was no need. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. One afternoon, while cleaning out the storage closet upstairs, I found an old wooden box pushed behind a stack of paint cans. The wood was worn smooth, the latch a little rusted. I almost set it aside, assuming it was another one of Ellen's forgotten things. But then I saw my mother's handwriting carved faintly into the lid. I sat on the floor, pried it open, and found a stack of folded letters tied with a thin blue ribbon. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still strong. The first page was addressed to me. "My dear Mara," it began. "If you're reading this, you're older now, and the world may not feel as kind as it once did. This house will change hands, faces, and voices, but it is yours as much as it was mine. This house is your safety. Never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home." My vision blurred halfway through the sentence. I pressed the paper to my chest and took a long, steady breath. The faint smell of cedar clung to the pages, the same scent that used to fill her closet when I was a child. I went downstairs, still holding the letter. Dad was sanding the trim by the window, sunlight spilling over his shoulder. When he saw the paper in my hand, he set the sandpaper down and walked over quietly. "Your mom's handwriting?" he asked softly. I nodded, handing it to him. He read the first few lines, his eyes glistening. "She always thought ahead," he murmured. "She knew how to protect you, even from me." We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint scent of dust and spring air drifting in from the open door. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentle and constant. Later, we sat on the front steps, watching the sky darken. The house looked different now, not just cleaner, but calmer, grounded. Every mark we'd painted over felt like sealing a wound. Dad reached over, resting a hand on mine. "You did right, Mara," he said quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The letter sat folded in my pocket, its words warm against my hand. There was no victory to celebrate, no revenge left to savor, just peace, simple and steady. The world around us was quiet. For the first time in years, the house felt whole again. Justice hadn't been loud, but it had lasted. And that was enough. Do you think I did the right thing by standing my ground and letting the truth speak for itself? Or should I have tried to make peace with them? Tell me your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.